Hey everyone, welcome to today's Monday Morning Minute. It is Monday, March 22nd, and here's what we have coming up. So, first, I'd like to just recap last week's readings, which were chapters 3 and 4 of the Singer text, as well as critical response number 4. Then we'll talk about this week's readings, which are chapters 5 through 7 of the Singer text, and we'll discuss critical response number 5, the last one. Whew. And then I'll end with just a couple of course notes for you all. So last week it was super fun to engage with some of you synchronously. It was also super cool to engage with your ideas on the discussion boards. You might have noticed we're now in large groups. And that's because I wasn't sure how many folks, week to week, and of course it's 100% your choice, were going to show up to the synchronous session versus the just the asynchronous option. So I made big groups to ensure that everyone has people to respond to, and therefore everyone will be responded to. So now you're in large groups. Hooray! Okay, so last week, chapters 3 and 4 talked a lot about EL engagement and also strategically using supports. And the first question that I posed to you all was thinking about engagement and supports in tandem. And we had some really awesome, brilliant ideas that I wanted to share with you. So first comes from Kaylee, who wrote, "It is important to structure our classrooms in a way that enhances student engagement and participation. By doing so, we are mitigating the silence and positively impacting our ELs. Support and engagement are related to one another in the sense that we must provide our students with the appropriate support they need in order for them to actively engage in their learning. Teachers need to keep in mind the balance of support. Too many supports leads to dependent learners, and too few supports leads to student disengagement." For sure. And I love that Kaylee cited the discussion of that balance between engagement and supports. And I pulled the chart from page 95, and we talked about that in the synchronous session as well, that it's a constant calibration and recalibration. We want to find kind of that sweet spot, and that will require, to Tabby's point, some constant observation. So Tabby writes, "In order to assess a bi or multilingual student's level of engagement, the teacher must be observant. This means teachers must be prepared to adjust supports throughout their lessons. For example, if multiple students are visibly struggling with an assignment, then it would be appropriate for the teacher to provide additional modeling and or increase scaffolding and supports. This type of scaffolding can include tiered supports like sentence frames that vary in structure from simple to complex." Exactly. I mean, differentiation, scaffolding, these are the names of the game. And as we talked about in our synchronous session too, even within, sentence frames, to Tabby's point here, those sentence frames can themselves be tiered. They themselves can be scaffolded from pretty basic with, a lot of words provided by the sentence frame itself to a little bit more sophisticated with the students filling in more of the blanks, so to speak. So excellent work, everyone. I'm super excited to talk with you about chapters 5 through 7 of the Singer text. So this is, on paper, it looks like a lot of reading, but it's good reading. And I think it's relatively easy reading. And I have a few reading notes for us at the bottom of the slide that I'll talk about. But first, just to kind of give an overview of these chapters. We read sort of the intro to this section. It is support, section 3. So chapter 4 was kind of the first chapter here. And now we're actually looking at those supports. So chapter 5, she's very mindful about how she's organized this book. And so she starts chapter 5 with strategies to build background. Think about these strategies as things to do before a lesson. And here she mentions the importance of not only connecting to prior knowledge, prior content knowledge, which is really important, but also prior linguistic knowledge. Activate what students know about language as a means of getting into the content and the language demands of the assignment or of the lesson. Then, during the lesson, she goes into strategies to scaffold language throughout that task. And this is chapter 6. So before is chapter 5, during chapter 6. And these Scaffolding strategies are low risk. She makes a big point about that, right? We want easy ways into the content and multiple easy ways into the content for students. And they're here to increase engagement and students' communication. And then finally, in the Beyond section, this is chapter 7, she talks about strategies to teach language beyond a task. So in this chapter, she's specifically talking about incorporating explicit language instruction within a lesson. She has a lot of caveats that are super important to pay attention to. She talks about how, just grammar lesson after rote grammar lesson is not going to close the opportunity gap. Whatever lessons that we teach explicitly, like mini lessons is what she's in favor of. Whichever ones we choose, we have to have a reason behind that. Perhaps those lessons, those mini lessons that we choose are helpful because it relates to the lesson that we will be talking about later in the day. Or this is a particular issue that you've noted, and you want to make sure that every student is getting it. So that's what she means by, beyond a task, actually kind of pulling back the curtain about language. And so like last week, again, this is a lot of reading on paper, but I want you to definitely pay attention and carefully read the introductory subsections for chapters 5, 6, and 7. Those are the first few pages. And they come before the subsection starting 5.1 or 6.1 or 7.1. It's just the very first few pages of the chapter. And then with all of the other subsections and strategies in each chapter, feel free to skim, feel free to kind of zoom in on some, but perhaps just, skim over others as you need to, as you'd like to. And so this brings us to critical response number 5. If we're doing the Canvas option, remember that your initial post is due Thursday, 2 follow-ups due on Sunday. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to select a text that you can imagine yourself teaching, or perhaps one that you have already taught. And if you need any help with this, I did on Canvas, and I believe in the email I sent to you on Friday, I did include a link to Open Educational Resources, OER. You can also Google OER, and you can filter there by topic, by grade level, and it's all free Creative Commons stuff that you can use. Okay, so select your text. Secondly, read it super carefully several times over. I want you to identify the necessary background information that is needed in order to make sense of the text. It doesn't have to necessarily be an article, as well as the language tasks and the language features that you see within it. Third, I want you to select strategies from 5, 6, and 7. Select a background building strategy from chapter 5, a language scaffolding strategy from chapter 6 to use during, and then a language feature strategy from chapter 7, a mini lesson about explicit language instruction from chapter 7. And then I want you to tell us how you would use these strategies mindfully when teaching your selected text. Now, of course, the golden rule and what we've all heard is that we have to know our students, right? So I understand that you're kind of hypothetically imagining a group of students. But also to Singer's point, right? She says there is a real risk, of course, to over scaffold, but she recommends starting always with a scaffold, and you can always remove it, right? Starting with one at least, right? And then add more or take away as needed. So again, this is just kind of getting us in the practice and thinking about the planning moves that are necessary for effective teachers of multilingual learners. So planning to have those scaffolds with a particular text. And then finally, just a couple course notes. Remember that we have our optional synchronous session also coming up this Friday, the 26th at 11:10 a.m. If you attend and participate at this optional synchronous session, you earn your full 5 points for critical response number 5. You don't need to mess with the Canvas discussion at all. And then secondly, I anticipate, because we have so many folks who are like really diligent about working very far ahead, that perhaps there are questions about our next unit, which is the e-workshop unit. And I want to let you know that we will talk much more about this. And I'll have you all have, you will have time to kind of poke around and look at these e-workshops and stuff at our final synchronous session on April 2nd. So take care, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. Cheers.